Christine Buckley, Executive Director of the Brain Aneurysm Foundation. So happy to have people on again for our monthly webinar series. Sorry we have some technical difficulties. We're usually very prompt, but get held up a little bit today. So we're just going to keep things moving. We're super excited to have Adrian Williams of Peloton and sharing his 1 in 50 story and desire to make a difference. And we also have Dr. Ogilvy, who's going to address some points at the end of the webinar. So I just ask everybody to, pay close attention. You can put some questions in the chat that we will address at the end as it pertains to different brain aneurysm issues. But without further ado, I want to just say welcome to Adrian Williams. We're so excited to have you as we are about to embark on September Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month. And we have Adrian as our newest ambassador, who has very close ties to this disease and is ready to help us make a difference. So Adrian, welcome. You wanted to say a quick hello to everybody?
Hello to everyone joining the webinar. Just want to say thank you all for being here and taking the time out of your days to kind of hear my story, but also to maybe get some questions answered and get some light shed on this this very impactful, very touching, specifically with me and my grandmother, thing that everyone goes through in life that we kind of realize all connects us, but isn't really spoken about and is kind of not treated as important things like heart attacks and cancer. And it's just as important. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Adrian. Adrian, can you tell us when you first heard the term brain aneurysm and what you knew about them at that time?
I think the first time I'd actually ever heard about it, but it wasn't really kind of discussed, was when I was in junior high school. I had a friend at the time who had a grandparent who had an aneurysm, and when I think I was in 6th or 7th grade, and so there, in terms of information, we didn't have our phones, where you could just kind of go and search about what a brain aneurysm was. I just knew that she had fallen asleep, similar to the same story as my grandmother. She had fallen asleep, suffered a rupture, and then she had passed away. And it just wasn't until later on in life that it ever actually gone down this road of what a brain aneurysm was until I experienced it with my grandmother.
Okay, thank you for that. And can you tell us a little bit more about your grandmother, how her aneurysm was diagnosed and the impact that she had on your life, and now moving forward, joining us as an ambassador for this cause?
Right. So my grandmother was my caretaker. Basically, my mom and my dad both worked full-time jobs, and she was the person that took care of all the grandkids, me, my brother, and my sister, my 2 cousins, Chris and James. And so we spent the most amount of time with her growing up. It's where I learned all my values from. It's where I got my discipline from. It's where I learned how to cook. It's where I learned how to be empathetic and loving and caring. And 2018, same year my nephew Phoenix was born, actually just a few days later. It was a Sunday in November, and my grandmother always did Sunday dinner, and I worked in for a boutique fitness studio at the time, and I pretty much worked 7 days a week, with no time for kind of self. And she would always have Sunday dinner. I would always say I was too tired. It was always on a whim where I just talked to my grandmother on the phone. And we had a very close relationship growing up. And during that stint in my life, my career kind of took me away from family and friends. And she was having Sunday dinner. She invited me up. And I guess she had gotten to the point where she was kind of frustrated with me saying, I can't make it. I can't make it. I can't make it. And she told me that I needed to create a life where I actually could see family and friends and people I cared about. And, I thought nothing of it when we hung up the phone. I told her, how much I loved her and that I was sorry that I wasn't coming. They had Sunday dinner. My grandma at some point went to sleep that night, suffered an aneurysm when she was sleeping. At some point the next day in the afternoon, my sister didn't hear from her. And so she went to check on her, and she had the keys to her apartment. And so she walked into her apartment and basically found my grandmother still alive, but not mobile. And so obviously she called 911. They took her to the hospital, and at the time they told us she was brain dead and would need to be on life support. She had no function of her body, and so like my family, that's not an option in terms of how my grandmother would have wanted to live the rest of her life. So my family chose to take her off life support, and it was hard because when I got there, I told guilt is the first thing you think of. Like I did not come to this simple Sunday family dinner, and now she can't speak to me. I won't be able to speak to her. And so when my mom told me she was going to take her off life support, I told her, hey, can I just sit in the room? I kind of want to lay on Nana's chest. And it's like one of those things, excuse me, where someone's heartbeat means so much until it's not there. And I laid on her chest until her heart just stopped beating. And then they told us, that she had passed and she wasn't there. And the immediate guilt I felt for not being there for my family, for not being there for her, for not being there in a moment which seems like it was the most simple thing, come for dinner. And I said no. And that was the last time in conversation that I had with her. And it took me years to get over that, because it was something I should have said yes to. And I will never get that moment back. And I know that. And so she wasn't going in for a routine procedure. We were caught off guard. And that was really tough for my family, especially having my nephew being born in the same week as my grandmother passing away.
Thanks, Adrian. Again, really sorry about the loss of your grandmother, and thank you for being so willing to share and open up to us about that. I know how difficult it is. And I can only imagine how devastating the loss of your grandmother so suddenly was for you and your family. At what point did you start to do a little more digging on brain aneurysms and or the possibility of anyone else in your family being impacted?
Right. I think I'm very much a proactive person, and if something happens to someone in my family, whether it's concerning their health or their mental health, I like to be proactive. And so the first thing, my brother, who is, I call him the universal dad. He's 4 years older. He was the person who was like, I think we all need to make sure that this is not something that runs in our family. And so the first thing we all did was make sure we all went to go get a scan, just to make sure that we were safe. Because in my mind, there's no harm in being proactive when it comes to your health, especially when it's actually so easy. We if we're lucky enough, we have access to medical attention. And I think for a lot of people, it's the fear that keeps them from going in and getting tested, because a lot of people I've just found within my industry, because I work in wellness, don't want to know, and it's something that they're afraid of. Whereas I do want to know, and I do think it's something that people should be aware of, because if you're aware, you can be proactive, and if you can be proactive, you may save your life, you may save a friend's life. Even us having this conversation and everyone sitting here, it's information that we're sharing. So maybe someone jumps off this call and feels inclined to maybe do something for themselves or for someone else.
Okay, thank you. So like so many other diseases, the early detection of brain aneurysms is critical to saving lives and reducing disabilities. And I know that you and your family members looked into getting screened. Were there any barriers to getting scanned? Was anybody not allowed, or was there any pushback on that?
No, I think anytime I've gone to the doctor, I always lead with why I'm there. And so I went in and I kind of the routine procedure, what brings you in here today. And I just told them my story. And I think once you hear someone's story, you don't question really why they're there. You know they're trying to just be um, smart about their own personal health, and it was really easy. And it's wild to me that I'd never thought to do this for myself, because I'm pretty adamant about making sure I do my routine checkups, whether it's for my annual that I go to the doctor for, with the dentist. I'm approaching 40 soon, so there's some ducks that I have to get in line in terms of these pieces of my health. But it was so simple. I think, and maybe people have had different experiences. I can't speak to everyone's experience, but I think when you're working with professionals in care, I don't think they question why you're there. I think they fully support it at the end of the day. I had no hiccups, uh, and I'm sure some people maybe have had to jump through hoops, um, or maybe were turned away, and you know, I'm sad for them actually having to have experienced that. But again, if it's something that you know someone's gone through, or especially when it's a family member or friend, it does not hurt to check. You will sleep better at night at the end of the day, knowing that you're being proactive about your own health. Um, I get stressed out when I think that there's something wrong, and I don't know if everyone sort of feels that same way. I have family members who they're like, I haven't been to the doctor in 3 years, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't understand, what you mean. It's not a great. I don't think it's good to be hypersensitive in thinking that you're sick, but I do think that if there's something that happens in your family, you should definitely take the time to check.
Well, thank you for that. And I have to say, I wish I was just turning 40, but that's not the case. But that's we want to get into that. And I am happy to hear it wasn't a problem for you to get a
No.
scan, because it is a problem for a lot of people, and that's why the education and awareness is so important for the foundation. I know there's some medical people on this call, but the people do run into that obstacle. Like, why do you need to get scanned? There has to be two more people in your family. So it's nice to hear that for you, that journey wasn't a problem. I'm sure people on here can identify that they have had issues, because we hear it a lot of times. So
Right.
like the awareness, the education, and bringing this to the forefront, and for more medical people to hear about it and realize, how important it is. And like you said, the peace of mind and knowing what's best for you is really critical. But I'm happy to hear for you, it wasn't a barrier. So that's great.
And I also think that if this is something that you're going through and you feel that way, it's okay to feel strongly about that, and you know, make sure no one's questioning what you want to do, because it's your personal health. Um, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. You don't need a reason to go in there and want to check on your health.
100%. We have to be our own best advocates for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, no, agree. So thank you. So how important is it for you now in raising awareness and education about brain aneurysms? And what are some of the ways that you're hoping to make an impact?
Well, it always has to be something um, that happens a lot of times specifically to a person to make you want to go out and make a difference. And I think having this happen to my family and myself, because it's not something that was in our control. And I had so many good years with my grandmother, but I think what it comes down to is, I work in the health and wellness space, and I work at my job, and I'm good at my job, because of something, my grandmother told me when I was a child, right? She always told me, Maurice, and Maurice is my middle name for everyone that doesn't know, and that's what my grandmother would call me all the time. She always said, Maurice, when you pay attention to people, you make them feel like they're the only people in the room. And so now I work at a job where I talk to a camera, to an audience where it's massive. And I think charitable work is what we all have the capability of doing. And I think specifically because there's such a close tie to the Brain Aneurysm Foundation and how it's affected my family. Um, I just never want people to have to experience what I did. And I'm sure there are people on this call who've gone through a similar situation where a family member was taken from them, and it maybe could have been preventable. And it happened. A friend of mine just Wednesday, his mom went in for a routine checkup, and she suffered a rupture while on the operating table, and she passed away on Friday. And so it was just like a storm of things, with me saying that I'm going to be doing this work, with that happening to his family. And it was just this, confirmation that this is something that I need to be doing. This is something that people need to be aware of. This is something where I can generally go out there and make an impact just from using my voice. And I don't think my platform serves any other purpose than empowering people and helping people. So this is something where we have the opportunity to go out there into the world and share this information with other people. And the only way to make impact is to have traction. And in order to have traction, we have to have the conversation. In order to have the conversation, we have to bring peoples and communities together. And so I want to, this is something that I will be a part of me for the rest of my life. And I'm signed on to that because I want to do the work, and I want to make sure families don't lose loved ones, because there's no need, especially if we're giving people the information and the resources. A lot of times it's people don't know where to go or what to do. And I think when we do things like this, sharing that information kind of helps in a big way and makes an impact. So again, to everyone who's here, thank you for supporting the foundation, whether you've gone through this or not. And hopefully, at the end of this conversation, when you leave, you feel inclined to, make sure you're taking care of yourself, but maybe also giving people information that have gone through this also, who don't have it, because it's information at the end of the day. And we can share education, and that's what we're supposed to do as a community. So
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. That was so well said. I really appreciate it. And now, before we get to any questions, or Adrian, before we ask if you have any specific questions to Dr. Ogilvy, now that we have you here, we want to know, particularly again, going into Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month this September, are there any key takeaways that people should know about brain aneurysms? What should they be aware of? What are the advancements being made? What is it that you want people to know about? Unmute, Chris, sorry. Thanks.
Well, first of all, thank you, Adrian, for sharing your story. It's indeed incredibly powerful, as some people are writing in. And we hear these stories, and also at our research dinner and symposium, patients are there. And it's one of the few places in medicine where people who raise money for research actually meet the people doing the research, which is pretty powerful. But your story hits a lot of really critical issues. Some we don't have the answers to yet. But for one thing, aneurysms, when detected before they rupture, are often very treatable. We've treated 3 today, and those people are going home tomorrow and Wednesday, and their aneurysms are gone. Now, they had to find them. And one issue that Christine raised is screening. We can talk about that in a little bit, but there's a ton of research that's going on. A lot of research is going on right now. The foundation has provided much of the seed money for that research, which is then springboarded into NIH grants and other grants. Couple of key issues for Aneurysm Awareness Month. Family history is important. And as Christine mentioned, 2 or more family members, you're going to be scanned. There have been problems in the past with getting scans, getting health insurance to pay for it. And I'm glad yours was covered. Screening is a very interesting question, and it gets into these epidemiology, and it's a huge cost, right, to get a scan. So the insurance companies, medicine wants to know, is it cost effective? Now, it turns out that a single aneurysm patient without any other family history, there's about a 5% chance their family has an aneurysm. When there's 2 or more family members that are affected, it's about 19%. Other high-risk individuals are smokers. We just conducted 3 big studies looking at particularly women who smoke, because unruptured aneurysms are more common in women. And ruptures, it's more 60-40, about 60% women, 40% men. Don't really know why that is, but there's definitely a hormonal influence on this disease. But for the women who smoke, we also did a follow-up study demonstrating that it's cost effective. That is, when you do cost effective studies, you have to calculate, okay, if someone has a hemorrhage, what does it cost to take care of someone who's had a hemorrhage if they live? And Adrian, the numbers are a bit grim when an aneurysm ruptures. About 50% of people don't survive that event. About 20% of people pass away right out front. Some make it to the hospital, like your grandma, and then pass away. Total of about 50% don't make it. Of the survivors, about a third of the people do well. They get back to life. They get back to giving news reports at night or wherever their job is. About a third of the people really don't do so well and are dependent on others. And there's about a third in between. And in the past, there's a decision process of whether to treat an aneurysm or not. And it's back to, it used to be just based on the size of an aneurysm. And now we're doing studies showing it's based on a number of factors: family history, smoking, several, if someone has several aneurysms, all these things, the shape of the aneurysm, which we're getting more information about with better scanning. All these things have impact on whether to treat an aneurysm or not. But I'm glad you got treated, because as my nurse Deirdre Buckley and I say sometimes, it's peace of mind, no pun intended, because you've seen someone go through something terrible, and you want to know you don't have that. And people who are in families with aneurysms, we counsel them about treatment or no treatment. But once they've seen someone hurt by an aneurysm, they often don't want to hear about not treating it, And then finally, the warning signs. If you read online or in books, it says the worst headache of my life. Well, that is, sometimes missed by physicians and healthcare associates. Someone will call up and say, I have a bad headache. They get Tylenol for a week before they figure out it's really a rupture or a leak from an aneurysm. And a warning leak can occur in about 25% of people. So all of these things are extremely important to bear in mind. I go to medical meetings where they talk about cost effectiveness, and I say, cost effectiveness in your world means how many dollars it counts, how many dollars it takes to screen, and what is cost of a life to a family, of a mother, of a grandmother, of a brother. That's a different cost. That there's no currency on that. And so we are arguing very hard to widen the screening criteria. And then if we do find an aneurysm, then we figure out what to do with it. That's a whole another body of research to thinking about decision-making for aneurysms. So there's a lot to think about, but the awareness part is key. And people like you telling your story gets that out there. Because when you're standing in line at the grocery store and you mentioned your mom had an aneurysm, I guarantee you someone within the next 5 people will say, my brother did, or my mother, or I know a friend who did, just like your friend mother did, last week. Of course, wherever I go, that's all I talk about is aneurysms, but that's a different thing. But it's very powerful, and stories like yours do raise awareness, and it's important to tell them, and important to, as we enter Awareness Month, we do a lot to try to get it out there, just during September, but all year round. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Ogilvy. Adrian, did you have any specific question that you want to ask Dr. Ogilvy at all about, just what you know so far? Is there anything that you haven't had an answer to that you would like to ask him?
I think like the community aspect is probably the most important. And so how do you think we can best serve the community because Awareness Month is, just in 2 days? Is it is it, are there ways that I can, give information maybe on a weekly basis that people may have questions to that we maybe didn't answer today? Is there anything specifically that I could speak to that you'd like people to know that we maybe haven't discussed on here?
I think you're hitting on all the important issues, and thanks to the internet and social media, the word is getting out there. But I will tell you, some of the things I just spoke about, other physicians don't know. And so what our main thing is to make sure if they hear the symptoms, they think of a possibility of a brain aneurysm. And when you think the diagnosis, then do the appropriate scan to figure it out. That's probably the biggest message we give. So we make September Awareness Month for physicians as well, general physicians. I go around giving talks at local hospitals, and a lot of these physicians who've been in practice for 30 years, it's a completely different practice than 30 years ago. I'd go out and give a talk and they'd say, well, I've seen 2 aneurysm patients in my practice. Now they're seeing someone almost every week because of the advancements in scanning. And they're getting a scan because they had headaches, or they're getting a scan because there's something else wrong elsewhere in their body, and they're checking in their head and find an aneurysm, incidental. And then we have to look into whether or not that person merits treatment. So I think what you're doing is as critical as anything, not only to the general community, but the medical community. And it's something that really does kind of raise awareness, and it's effective. We have Christine and I and others have programs making sure that this is covered in medical school differently than it was covered in medical school 20 years ago. It's a totally different thing because they're seeing so many more of these are being detected.
Thanks, Dr. Ogilvy. So yeah, I mean, to that point too, with Awareness Month coming up, the foundation has a ton of initiatives, a lot on social media. We ask you to just follow us on social media, share what we are posting. On September 21st, we're going to be in Charleston, South Carolina, awarding $635,000 in research funding to 17 different projects across the US and Canada. It's also our 2nd annual Day of Engagement. And that Day of Engagement is about educating and raising awareness primarily online through social media. And we have some videos that we'll be sharing and things like that. But we also have a Day of Engagement page, and Adrian is one of our ambassadors. So Lynn, if you can put in the chat Adrian's link to Adrian's page, if anybody wants to donate. Our goal for that day is $250,000. I mean, like I said, we're giving out $635,000. That's almost a third of our total revenue in a year. We've been raising it a little bit every year. We want to keep that going, but we need all of your support. But if you can't donate, it is sharing the information, talking about it, and educating wherever you can. And I think that's a critical thing. And I think, brain aneurysms, again, we at the foundation hear it every day, terrible stories. There's so many people on here. I know some who are so fortunate to have survived and been found and treated, others who've had loss, others that have had difficult survivals, but it's a very treatable disease. The treatment methods get better and better. Our chairman of our board almost died 6 years ago. This past November, when they had identified a 2nd aneurysm, this past November, they were able to go in and treat that aneurysm through his wrist, which they couldn't have done initially 5 years ago. So progress is being made, and we want to keep that going, but we need that through your support. So I would definitely encourage everybody to support Adrian and what he's doing to raise awareness and raise education for this disease, because it's the only way that ultimately that things are going to change and that a difference will be made. So I think now we can take a look. Lynn, maybe you can help with some of the questions if you want to unmute and ask any. I'll go in and look as well, but maybe you can start off if you see anything maybe we can throw out there.
Yes, I did actually copy some onto my notes here. So someone said, how closely related a family member should get scanned? How often to get scanned, and at what ages?
So those are excellent questions. And if there's 2 or more family members in the same family who've had an aneurysm, and Adrian, actually, some patients, 2 sisters or a mother and a son, they'll say, how do I know I'm not the second one? And
Right.
we don't. So sometimes I use that to justify screening. But if there's 2 or more family members or one of these other stronger indications, the first scan is usually in the late teens, 18 to 20, when people think they're invincible. So sometimes they don't want to scan, but that's when we recommend it. And then usually about every 10 years after that, to follow up with a family member. And they should definitely not smoke, because family history and smoking turns out are more than additive for aneurysms. It's not like 1 + 1. It actually kind of fuels the aneurysm growth and rupture.
Okay. And then what kind of scan should a closely related family member ask for?
Typically, what's easiest for the patient and often for the physician is an MRI, MRA. And then if something is detected, if there's any suspicion, often another test is done, either an angiogram or a CT angiogram. Sometimes a CT angiogram is done first. There's lots of literature on what we call sensitivity and specificity. That's how likely they to find an aneurysm. And once you get down to about 2 millimeters, some of these tests are harder to see the aneurysm than others. But the question is, would you do anything about an aneurysm that small? And it's just that then you get into this difference of age, location of where the suspicion is, and those types of things.
Yeah. And then someone actually said, I have an AVM rupture and it has not been easy trying to have my children scanned. I think we actually do have on our website, and I will put it in with the follow-up email from this, just a printout about exactly what to go in to your doctor and ask. It's kind of all written out there, so I can do that. Someone said, I thought most hospitals follow a universal protocol when someone comes in with stroke symptoms. And of course, we kind of know that that's not always.
Well, I would like to address that a little bit. I saw that question go by. Now, stroke is a big word, and there is what's called ischemic stroke, which ischemic just means the brain isn't getting enough blood and glucose and oxygen, which is blood supply. So a stroke can be a clot clogging a vessel, or it can be a hemorrhagic stroke where you actually have blood escaping from a vessel, and that's an aneurysm. So they're very different. And the so-called universal protocol, or these emergency treatments, that's more on the strokes that fly up into the blood under the vessel and clog a vessel. And then we rush in and can get a catheter up there and pull it out. A very different disease process than an aneurysm, where the vessel actually ruptures and blood sprays around the brain or into the brain to cause injury or to cause the problem.
Okay. There are are there other specialties that also treat aneurysms? Neuroradiologists? I don't know. Or maybe that was an answer to someone's question. Sorry. What test is okay for pacemaker patients? I don't know if you would know.
Well, the problem is when patients have a pacemaker, having an MRI can be a problem. Some pacemakers are MRI compatible, some aren't. And usually you have to find out exactly which pacemaker you have. But then you can go to other techniques like a CT angiogram. If someone has a pacemaker, they can have a scan to look for aneurysms. So there are ways around that, but it can be something that needs to be dealt with. Okay.
I'm also going to put in the chat, someone was asking if the BAF has, and I think I just got rid of that, asking if we have 8.5 by 11s or cards or anything that you could drop off or hand to people. So I'm going to put the link to the page on our website where you can download those. So you're able to download them and print them out and bring them with you.
And if you don't get the link and you want to follow up via email, we'll get them to you.
Yep. How do you differentiate an ACOM aneurysm from a normal perforating vessel? Is it possible small aneurysms are actually perforating vessels?
I saw that question. That's a pretty high level question. ACOM aneurysm is just one location in the brain. We tend to name aneurysms in the brain by location of the artery from which they arise. And perforating arteries are tiny little vessels I saw them today under the microscope, but they about the size of a human hair that are very critical that need to be spared. But often with advanced scanning or an angiogram, you can separate out those differences.
Okay. And then someone says, do you recommend patients carry a I have an aneurysm card while driving in case they are found unconscious?
Hopefully, I mean, we have definitely done that with people. Hopefully, if someone has an aneurysm and they're being counseled to leave it alone, that is not treat it, the thought there is the risk of treatment is extremely low. I mean, pardon me, the risk of rupture is extremely low, lower even than the risk of treatment. In a younger individual, many of these treatments can be done with low single-digit risks these days in the sort of 2 to 3%, but it's not zero. And if it's an older individual, it's a tiny aneurysm, you know, their risk of rupture over the rest of their life may be less than 1%, or less than 1 or 2%. So we factor all that in. So hopefully if someone's been counseled to not treat an aneurysm, they've also been counseled to just live completely normally in terms of full normal exercise, normal activity. But some people have wanted to carry a card in the event that that happens.
Okay. Is having a history of migraines also a risk factor?
That's an excellent question, or even headaches in general. We have not been able to find that as a risk factor. It's been looked at a number of times, and just migraines alone. Now, the problem is someone can have a bad headache, or a migraineur, someone who has migraines, can have an unusual headache. That's something we listen for in the emergency room. A migraine patient who all of a sudden shows up in the emergency room, you know, I have migraines, but this is something different, or this feels different. Don't blow that off as just another migraine. You know, that's when we want the patient to be scanned and investigated. And why are they in the emergency room? It was bad enough to come to the emergency room. We feel like they should be investigated.
Okay, thank you. Have you seen an increase in ruptures since COVID? And do you think COVID has an impact on aneurysms?
That is a great question. And we've looked in a preliminary way at that, and it does not seem to have affected it. What happened during COVID is that, unfortunately, people who had bad headaches didn't come to the hospital, just like with other diseases. You know, people had a lot more heart attacks during COVID too. And it's because they let the disease progress, and they might, before COVID, they would have come to the hospital. They said, well, I'm going to stay out of that hospital. That's where COVID is. And unfortunately, might have had a second hemorrhage. It doesn't seem to increase the risk of aneurysm formation or rupture. It did seem to increase somewhat the risk of a stroke, you know, a blood clot going to the head. Again, a different problem.
I'm hearing about some of the good research happening. Could we share what work is happening to address preventative care?
So there's a lot going on. There's and our research symposium in a couple of weeks, we break it down into, first of all, there's a whole area of research in detection. There's actually research going on to try to find a blood test, a biomarker, so that you could just draw the blood sample of someone who might have a higher risk of an aneurysm. Say, you know, you need to be scanned because you may have an aneurysm based on this blood test. It's not there yet, but detection is definitely a big part of it. And then there's a whole body of research going on. A lot of it's in animal work, looking at aneurysm formation, because it may be that an aneurysm forms kind of as an injury response. That is, for instance, when people smoke, smoking has things in it that can injure a blood vessel wall, and it may be your body's attempt to repair that injury that actually could cause an aneurysm to either form or grow. So we are looking into that. Preventative wise, the big things are, you know, usually don't smoke, and hypertension has always been kind of asked about in relation to aneurysms. In the studies that have been done, so many of the smokers have hypertension. It's hard to separate those two things out in a lot of the studies. In our study on women with aneurysms, it did increase if you had both smoking and hypertension, it did increase the risk of having an aneurysm, but it was tough to dissect them out. And other than that, just good diet and good, normal living. The smoking is a big one in terms of aneurysms.
Okay, someone's asking what percentage of found aneurysms are treated and what factors go into that determination?
I love you. I I have a manuscript sitting on my desk, which is I'm going to spend tonight going over, which talks about that. So just to give you an idea, at least in my practice in Boston, and I see this is my specialty, so I see a lot of it. But over about a 7-year interval, we treated 1,100 aneurysms. And over that same interval, we evaluated and did not treat about 1,200 aneurysm patients. So there's a lot of people we see for one of the reasons or another that I elucidate, I talked about, we don't treat. So if someone's 85 and has an aneurysm, the size of a pea, and it's in a very safe part of the brain because aneurysm location can relate to hemorrhage. So there, as I said, there's lots of factors besides size, but certainly size and age, the shape of the aneurysm, all these things factor into it. But we spend a lot of our time counseling people why they might not need treatment. Now, 25 years ago, most aneurysms were found because they had ruptured, because we didn't have the good scanning that we have now. So the unruptured aneurysm discussion and the unruptured aneurysm finding wasn't really happening. Most aneurysms are found because they ruptured. And we do have some data to show that as unruptured aneurysms are being treated, if you look at these national databases, it looks like the incidence of subarachnoid hemorrhage is coming down a bit over a 15-year interval. So we're hoping by treating patients, we are making a dent in the total number of hemorrhages.
Okay. Should I get screened annually if I've already had one rupture, one non-rupture, and then some kind of lesion, which I can't, diulifoy or something, and AVMs in small intestine. Are these all related to weakness in blood vessels over entire body?
Well, it's certainly suspicious, and this is a situation where you're getting pretty granular, and you probably want to take that to your physician and ask that question, because screening, once screened, and if it's a small aneurysm, you're going to follow. People say, well, how often do I have to get screened? We've done some work in that area, again, cost effectiveness, but usually it doesn't have to be every year. It can often be spread out to every 2 or 3 years or even longer. But if there's other evidence of vessel weakening in the body, that's a specific discussion I'd have with your physician about the specifics of it.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to go through these. If someone gets severe headache, doesn't mean if he or she has a ruptured aneurysm. If someone gets ruptured aneurysm, and how much time should he or she get to the hospital in order to get the correct diagnosis and treatment?
So if someone has the worst headache of their life, that's the general description. They should, something they've never felt before. People describe this like getting hit on the head with a bat. They feel a pop in their head. That's the classic description. As I said, we have a lot of patients who relate and work with the foundation. Gee, I had this bad headache for 3 days and finally I got a scan. But the classic description is worst headache of life, out of the blue, and sometimes people will get drowsy. I've seen videos, actually. There's a couple of videos, one of a person on a dance floor who had a hemorrhage, and really they almost got knocked out for a couple of seconds and then came around. But if you have the worst headache of your life, the idea is you would go to an emergency room and hopefully they would think of the diagnosis. The first step would be to do a CT scan. And that can be very diagnostic. It can show the blood, doesn't always show the aneurysm, but we have other tests then to go look for the aneurysm.
Okay, and then there's one here. Do you think drug treatment of aneurysm is on the horizon? Example, is there a hypothesis matrix, something for remodeling blood vessels contributing to aneurysms?
Well, one thing that's happened over the last 20 years is our treatments are getting less invasive. So they're becoming endovascular. And I see people are writing in, they've had coils, they've had stents put in the artery. There's newer devices where you actually put a stent in the artery, and the artery actually grows over the stent, so your body sees your own body. So there's a whole new biology of studying these things. And we published a study a few months ago based on a few years of work where the adult brain blood vessels actually have the ability to get larger or smaller based on flow. And we put one of these devices in which increases flow to one artery, and it seems like it can take the pressure off another artery. So we're learning a lot about the biology there.
Okay, I think we've kind of hit most of the questions. There's one more I see that I'd like to ask before we wrap up, and it says, what would the biomarker be measuring? Inflammation or bleeding times?
The biomarkers are designed to look for not injury, but this is Vince's stuff, Christine. But they are designed to look for proteins that associate with aneurysms, or markers specifically for brain aneurysms. And it's a hard thing because you got this tiny little thing in your head and you're trying to find some marker in the blood that tells you that's a potential problem. And that's why it's difficult research. It's almost like a hunting expedition where you look at lots of factors, and then you look at aneurysm patients specifically and blood from aneurysm patients and see if you can find something that falls out of that. So that research has been going on about 6 or 7 years, 8 or 9 years, and it's getting there, but they're not there yet.
All right, thank you. And just one last one before wrap up, because it is something that people ask quite frequently. How likely is someone with a brain aneurysm rupture to have another brain aneurysm?
So if they don't smoke, it's pretty unlikely. However, multiple aneurysms can occur in about 20% of patients when they're first diagnosed. And what they're talking about is what's called a de novo aneurysm. That means a new aneurysm. And it's thought that that can occur in up to about 6% of people with one aneurysm over about 10 to 15 years. So it takes a while for these things. So sometimes when we have patients and they're smokers or they have a family history or other risk factors, we clip an aneurysm or coil an aneurysm that's been ruptured or unruptured. We'll scan that patient 8 or 10 years later to check for any new aneurysms.
Thank you. All right, so again, we're getting close to the end of time. And again, there's so many things I just want to thank and give Adrian a chance to say some parting words. But Dr. Ogilvy, thank you as always as a founder of this organization. Our 30th anniversary is next year. I don't think you knew what you're getting yourself into, but thank you for always being willing to share your time and your expertise. There's been so many comments of people being so grateful of Adrian, as we are of him being willing to share his story and speak up. I mean, it's going to be so impactful for him to reach the people that follow him in his fitness world and what he does professionally. It's just amazing. But I do ask everybody, honestly, people have asked, how they can help. September's Awareness Month. Share the information. We do have handouts if you want them. Reach out to the office. I'm Christine at bafound.org, Lynn at bafound.org, office at bafound.org. We will get you what you need. Again, September 21st is our 17th annual Research Grant Symposium. We're giving out $635,000 to 17 great projects in Charleston, South Carolina. We go to a different city and state every year. We're super excited about that. Again, it's our second annual day of engagement, and our goal is to get $250,000 by the end of that day. We encourage you to donate to Adrian's ambassador page because he's working it and pushing it and just giving so much. And we're just so grateful again for him, for sharing, for caring and wanting to make a difference. So Adrian, I'd just like to give you the parting words that what you'd like to share with this community who also cares so much about this disease.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I just want to say thank you to, both you, Lynn, Chris, all for just giving me the opportunity to, put my hand in this work. I'm really looking forward to, making progressive change and saving people's lives. And if I can do that by using my voice, I'm really excited to do that. Thank you to the community who came here just to listen and get some answers for yourselves or family members today. The biggest thing we can all do is continue to spread the word. And if you're able to donate, that's even more amazing. I'll relink my page on all forms of social media. And I'm just excited to start this work with the Brain Aneurysm Foundation. So thank you really for this opportunity.
Everyone who signed on today, I mean, you're all part of our community. You've all been helping us make a difference for so long. And I just beg you not to stop, to continue this fight with us. And rest up. You get a few more days in August, and then we're into September.